the effort that it takes. So I'm happy to be here with you, even if it's just digitally. Let's begin by creating an intentional space for ourselves to engage in this practice. So whatever running around we've been doing all morning, whatever it's taken for us to get here together today, all of those things we just leave outside of our practice space that we can create for ourselves. And it doesn't matter where we are. We can be, I'm sitting at my desk. You can be in your living room, in your kitchen, in your bedroom, wherever it is you are. And if you have a meditation room, if you have an altar, wherever it is you are, we allow that to become an intentional space. We could even say a sacred space for engaging in spiritual practice and contemplation, letting all of your worldly concerns for the moment wait outside of the space so you can fully dedicate yourself to the study and practice of the teachings of the Buddha. And as we set this kind of intentional space for ourselves, we will then try to set a strong motivation that the reason we've come together today is not merely for our own benefit alone, but so that we might be of maximum benefit to others. Recognizing that the way to freedom and bliss is to be of service to others, we dedicate ourselves to achieving full enlightenment so that we might be able to be of service to others. And we recognize that the best way to do that is by taming our mind, by studying, by engaging in meditation practice. And so we come together today to study this text by Shantideva, to study what it means to live life like a bodhisattva, so we can improve our minds, improve our wisdom, we can increase our capacity to be of service to others. So that's the reason we're coming together in this way. So setting that kind of motivation, then, let us offer some preliminary prayers. We will offer this first prayer of refuge and bodhicitta 3 times in Tibetan and once in English. Refuge, going for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, recognizing them as authentic sources of refuge, and that there are no authentic sources of refuge outside of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, is what it means to be a Buddhist. And so to begin all of our practices with generating and reminding ourselves of the mind of refuge is quite important. And bodhicitta, the desire or aim or intention to become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings, is the entryway into the Mahayana vehicle. And so to begin all of our practices with these two, with prayers that encourage us to remember those qualities of mind is important, right? Because it makes sure that everything we're doing is infused not just with our spiritual practice of the teachings of the Buddha, but also with our endeavors to practice the Mahayana path. Sangye chiran soki chonam la janchu paru dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola pencher sangye drupar shok Sangye chiran soki chonam la janchu paru dagni kyapsu chi dagi jinsogi pesonam gi jola pencher sangye drupar shok Sangye chiran soki chonam la janchu baru dagni kyasu chi dagi jinsogi pe sonam gi chola pencher sangye drupar shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time, and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain into the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. Now, a short mandala offering we will offer twice, once in Tibetan and then once in English, requesting the teachings from your side, and then also requesting all of the blessings of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So we visualize the entire universe that exists, known and unknown universes, and then we purify them so they're free of all faults, all stains, that they are filled with bliss and delight and luxury. And then these purified versions of the universe we offer to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas so that all sentient beings might have the opportunity to dwell in such perfect abodes. So that's the visualization. 사시프기 조익싱매도 드라미라블리 니댕게 반디 상계신도 미테어이 조킹언덕 싱라 즈펄쇼. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun, and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and I offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hiram Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami. We'll continue with offering praise to Shakyamuni Buddha as a way of acknowledging the many great qualities of the objects of refuge and offering dedication and conviction in their benefit, and also as a way of accumulating merit. And then after this, we'll offer the Heart Sutra, which is one of the primary teachings on the nature of reality, which is to say emptiness. And so as we begin our practice today, we're offering prayers that are aligning our minds both in the two aspects of method and wisdom, or compassion and wisdom, which are the two accumulations that we need to simultaneously accumulate together in order to achieve Buddhahood. So regardless of the topic of the teaching, it is, or the meditation session, or whatever it may be, we try to infuse all of our spiritual practices with these two aspects of method and wisdom, or compassion, or bodhicitta, and wisdom. And so these prayers help us align our minds in that way. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sukata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, the supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When, O supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, you paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. with pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom motion like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the three worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With supreme signs, face like spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Dust free like you, the three worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path of the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtue, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all three ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bowing with bodies as many as all realms' atoms in all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all-seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time, the Bhagwan was dwelling on massive Vulture Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagwan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of the Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, no phenomena. There is no eye element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path, and there is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwelled in the three times and manifestly completely awakened to the unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance upon the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering should be known as the truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that, it is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom just as you have indicated, and even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that which had been spoken by the Bhagavan. I'll continue with these prayers to dispel hindrances. I and all surrounding sentient beings go for refuge to the Buddha, go for refuge to the Dharma, go for refuge to the Sangha. We prostrate to the Great Mother, Prajnaparamita, surrounded by all the children and by the assemblies of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions. By depending on my prostrations to all of you, may these words of truth be actualized. In the past, the Deva King Indra dispelled the Maras by reflecting on the profound meaning of the wisdom gone beyond and by reciting the profound words in daily recitation. In the same way, I also reflect on the profound meaning of the Great Mother, Prajnaparamita, and recite the profound words in daily recitation. May all diseases, spirit possession, bad conditions, and all the negative directions, that which happens due to past karma and immediate conditions, may all these be dispelled, may it become non-existent, may they be pacified. I prostrate to the gathering of dakinis and the 3 chakras, who abide in the holy yoga of using space. By your powers of clairvoyance and magical emanation, look after the practitioners like a mother her only child. Akatsamarta Shadara Samarya Pe, Akatsamarta Shadamaya Pe, Akatsamarta Shadamaya. Akasamarata Shadara Samaraya Petayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. By the teaching of the 3 supreme jewels possessing the power of truth, may inner and outer hindrances be transformed, may they be dispelled, may they be pacified. Shintam Kuriye Swaha. May all negative forces opposed to the Dharma be completely pacified. May the host of 80,000 obstacles be pacified. May we be separated from problems and harmful conditions to the Dharma. May all enjoyments be in accord with the Dharma. And may there be auspiciousness and perfect happiness right here, right now. Great. Thank you so much. So, as we begin today, I wanted to just kind of reiterate what was mentioned in the beginning, that I encourage questions. That's kind of the heart of this opportunity to be together, right? Is that we can ask questions as a community. And I don't mind being interrupted, but try to find a good moment and try to keep your questions relatively connected to whatever it is we're discussing. That would be helpful. And just remember there are other people as well. So when you ask a question, it doesn't have to include a long story, but just a question. And we try to keep it, be aware of everyone that is joining us today so we can all get the most out of this. With that said, if you put a question in the chat, I probably won't see it, but our moderators will, and they'll ask it at the end, and we'll make sure to have time for questions at the end as well. So there will be that opportunity. When I got up this morning to prepare for this class, I didn't have any electricity, and I didn't have electricity almost the whole day yesterday. So yesterday evening, if you did attend class yesterday, you might have noticed about halfway through, my power came on. And so my battery backup, not all the lights in my room are on my battery backup. So about halfway through our class last night, if I all of a sudden got brighter, that was because the power came on for a few hours. But when I woke up, there was no power. So I was very concerned about if my battery backup would last for our whole class or not. But that obstacle was at least temporarily overcome, and the power came on about an hour ago. So we can rejoice in that small ripening of good karma, that we at least for the time being have electricity that allows us to spend this time together. And I say that jokingly, but the truth is, all of our experiences in this life, all of the conditions we come across are the ripening of karmic seeds that we've planted, whether they be individual karmic seeds or karmic seeds that we've planted kind of, as a group. And our experience of them as being opportunities for joy or opportunities for suffering, that comes from our own mind. But the ripening of those experiences, there's nothing we experience that isn't the result of karma. Even small things like having electricity that makes sure that I can offer this teaching without worrying about, my computer turning off in the middle. And the reason that's useful to remember is because if we want to make sure we have the best conditions to practice the Dharma, to engage in a spiritual life, to lead a meaningful life, and to be of service to others, then obviously having more external conducive conditions makes that easier, right? Ultimately, it's about our mind. We can be in the most difficult external conditions and still have a very pure, perfect practice of Dharma. That's possible, but it's harder, especially for beginners like us. So having good external conditions is a result of creating the karmic seeds that ripen into those external conditions. And now, whatever conditions are ripening right now, those are seeds we've already planted, right? So we have to deal with them the best we can, whether they are positive and conducive conditions or difficult conditions and obstacles. But we can try to ensure that we only have more and more conducive conditions in the future, in this life and in future lives. And the way we do that is by rejoicing in those opportunities when we experience positive karma ripening and encourage and ensuring that we're practicing virtue in such a way to only be planting positive seeds that will then ripen as conducive conditions to continue our practice, to achieve realizations, to be of service to oneself and others. So realizing even small things like, oh, today we have electricity, and rejoicing in that seems like a small thing, right? But it's an opportunity to bring your everyday experience and the Dharma together, to realize that everything in our life has to be related to the Dharma. But instead of taking the everyday world and putting it on top of the Dharma, diluting the Dharma in that way, we bring the Dharma to our everyday life, right? We should move in that direction from the Dharma outwards. And that way, everything we experience it through a Dharma lens. And that isn't changing the experience itself, or rather, it's not changing the conditions, but it's changing the way we experience and understand those conditions. So even a small thing, we can recognize that as the ripening of good karma, karma that is affecting all of us together, and we can rejoice in it. And that rejoicing, it encourages us to continue engaging in the practices that will cause similar positive karma and conducive conditions to happen in the future. So it's not for nothing, right? It's not just empty words. It's creating a habit of virtue. I often rush our meditations on Sundays, not on purpose, but because I just run out of time and I don't keep track of time as well as I should. And this really is a bad example to set. And the reason I say that is because meditation is critical to our path of practice, right? Both types of meditation. Tibetan Buddhism understands that meditation, roughly, we can say there's two main types. One is what we call placement meditation, and that is meditation to help us focus our mind and allow our mind to be free of distraction. Most commonly, it's done through different mindfulness practices. And then there is analytical meditation. Analytical meditation is when we're actually taking some Dharma topic and applying our focused mind to that topic to try to understand that topic from every direction, to try to have a deep-seated conviction in the truth of that Dharma topic, so then we can make it indistinguishable from our minds, right? So these types of meditation work together. If we only have placement meditation, we could achieve like high levels of bliss and relaxation, but we don't ever really progress on the path. So it's not that useful. But right now, our minds are often so distracted that to engage in analytical meditation is also difficult because our minds are running around, like crazy monkeys. So we use practices of placement meditation to help calm and focus our minds. And then once we've developed some level of focus or attention, we apply that to an analytical meditation. And there are other types of meditation. Sometimes when you say I'm meditating on compassion or love, those don't really fall into those two categories of either placement or analytical, but they kind of sit somewhere in the middle. But for the most part, we can understand our meditation to be of these two types. And they're critical. They're critical because we have spent so many lifetimes following the afflicted thoughts, right? Following our own afflicted minds. And we've created these bad mental habits of the way we engage with the world. And meditation is what helps curb those habits. So if we really want to experience the joys that come from a spiritual practice, if we really want to achieve steps towards Buddhahood or even towards liberation, we need to conquer the afflictive minds that are serving as the primary obstacles to us achieving that level of joy, contentment, peace, bliss. And those obstacles come from these repeated bad mental habits that we've cultivated since beginningless time over and over again. And we look around these days and our attention spans seem like they are shorter than ever, right? And not only are our attention spans shorter, but we're less interested in knowing things than ever. We just want the headline and we just want enough information that'll give us, the ammunition that confirms what we already believe. That's what it seems like. The truth is, though, I mean, that may be true. Who knows? The internet and digital communication is transforming the way we experience in the world in kind of unprecedented ways. Yet, at the same time, the distraction of everyday life and the ability for our mind to very quickly be distracted and to only want to seek out what it already believes is not new, right? These are the exact afflictions the Buddha was talking about, and the exact affliction Shantideva was talking about in his commentary or his explanation of the teachings of the Buddha. So these aren't new afflictions. Now, maybe the circumstances are obviously different. We don't see anything in the Buddhist teachings about the internet or about social media, right? But it's the exact same root afflictions. So the afflictions aren't new. And the way to deal with them is not new. This is the nature of samsara. The nature of samsara is to be dissatisfied and distracted, right? The nature of samsara is to mistake your experience and the conditions that led to that experience and assume they're the same thing. As long as we're in samsara and we're not paying attention to our minds, we believe that our experiences of happiness and our experiences of suffering exist outside of us, that there's something that is being done to us or something that we are holding on to from our side, right? But as long as we locate happiness and suffering as something outside of us, we are never going to be fulfilled, and we're always going to be dissatisfied because there is no suffering or happiness that is outside of us. We create it all ourselves. The external conditions provide the factors that make it easier or more difficult to experience happiness and or suffering, right? But the mental experience of happiness and suffering comes from our minds. It doesn't come from the outside. The outside conditions come as a result of the karma we created that ripen into certain conditions. But our experience of those conditions, our labeling those happiness or suffering, and are then allowing those conditions to overwhelm the way we are living in the world, that doesn't come from the outside. That comes from us. We're in control of our own happiness. We're in control of our own sorrow. So we have to recognize that. You know, that is the heart of the Buddhist teachings, is that we have full control. This is not something being done to us from the outside, and there's nothing outside of ourselves that we can grasp onto that will ever make us happy. Not completely. We can experience temporary happiness when we reach outside of ourselves and grab onto things. But that temporary happiness, by its very nature, is samsara. And so if we accept that temporary happiness as if it were real happiness, then when that temporary happiness goes away, it just leaves us even more bereft, and our suffering is even more greatly exacerbated, right? We need to remember and realize that all of our happiness and all of our sorrow come from within. And meditation is the primary tool we use to develop the mind that recognizes that. And so whenever I rush our meditations, I kind of deprive us of the opportunity to flex that muscle. Fortunately, CKSL does offer meditation a couple times a week online. We have some wonderful senior students who lead meditation. So at least, you know, I'm not depriving people entirely. What's important though is to think, not just take my word for it, but to try to understand how does meditation actually help free us from samsara? Because there are so many different religious schools that suggest we should meditate, right? And there's different types of meditation across different religions, and there's secular meditation. So how does meditation free us from suffering? And how is Buddhist meditation different than non-Buddhist meditation? Now, first off, I think any kind of proper meditation is going to be useful. Any chance you have to become familiar with your mind is useful. The danger, or not danger, that's the wrong word, but the potential obstacle if you're learning meditation from non-Buddhist sources is you can meditate on anything, right? You can meditate on anger. You can meditate on any non-virtue. You know, meditation itself is neutral. Meditation is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. It's a tool. And depending on how you use it, you can either refine your mind and prepare yourself to become more engaged with a meaningful life, or you can go in the other direction. It's entirely possible. And so if your meditations are encouraging you to engage in worldly happiness and to seek out the self-cherishing mind as if that's going to bring you happiness, then those meditations aren't really helping you. Or in fact, they're harming you. And so meditations that aren't Buddhist meditations can be beneficial. They can be neutral or beneficial, but you have to look at the content of the meditation and make sure that it is a meditation that aligns with Buddhist ideas. So, as I said, meditation is allowing us to really become intimately familiar with our mind and with all of the goings on in our minds. And then once we become familiar with that, we can see how most of our life we spend under the control of our afflicted emotions, right? Whether it be ignorance, anger, or attachment, or some derivation thereof. They arise in us without us wanting them to arise. They take over all of our, senses. We see red, quote unquote, and we act in ways that we wouldn't have acted if we had a calm mind. All because we allowed our emotions to get better of us. And we've all had some experience of that, right? Whether it be our anger or our desire or any other, our jealousy, any of these emotions where we say something or do something, and afterwards we say, oh, I should not have done that. That was a bad idea, but I wasn't thinking clearly. Why was I not thinking clearly? Because I didn't have control over my mind. Why didn't I have control over my mind? Because I allowed my afflicted emotions to take control, right? And the truth is, we have the ability to stop that. And the way we stop it is by recognizing those afflicted emotions for what they are, which is the internal enemy that causes us suffering and pain. By recognizing that, instead of having these afflicted emotions just act, being generated in a reactive way without any control, we notice when our mind is leaning towards them. And when we notice that, we can stop them before they arise, or very shortly after they arise, before we have a chance to act on them. Because those afflicted emotions are what are causing us suffering. Again, it's not the conditions that we are reacting to that's causing suffering. It's our mind that is reacting to them in such a way that we experience suffering. So meditation gives us tools, gives us the tool to engage in that type of reflexive study. Again, those tools don't only exist within Buddhism. Similar tools exist within contemporary secular psychology as well. The big difference, though, is that Buddhism is not looking just at the happiness of this life. So all of the tools and methods we cultivate in the Buddhist practice is not looking just for immediate relief or immediate satisfaction, but it's recognizing that our goal should always be beyond this life, right? Our goal should be to have continual positive rebirths, eventually leading to Buddhahood so that we be of maximum benefit to others. Our goal is to recognize that self-cherishing and seeking out the pleasures of this life does nothing but harm us, right? And that can conflict with some secular or non-Buddhist meditation or inner work. So whenever we engage in a practice where we're observing our own mind, we're trying to control our own mind, we should do so recognizing that immediate gratification is not the goal. Now, of course, if we want to be happy in this life, the best way to be happy in this life is to work for others. The best way to have a life that's full of peace and contentment and is free from all of the upsets of anger and other delusions is to work for the benefit of others. That's true, right? As long as our goal is to serve others, we'll find we receive, countless benefits in our life. But those countless benefits shouldn't be the goal. They shouldn't be the aim. So when we have a consistent meditation practice, then everything becomes easier. And what I mean by that is contentment becomes easier. We are less reactive and we're more constructive. So when we experience obstacles or difficulties in our life, instead of having this habitual or instinctual response to them, we analyze them for what they are and see what an appropriate response would be, and then allow ourselves to react in an appropriate way. And we create a type of emotional and psychological space that I think is really critical. And what I mean by space is, again, we no longer are reactive. So we have the ability to observe our own mind as our mind is running in circles. We have the ability to see what emotion is becoming activated right now for me when I experience such and such a thing. Is this emotion actually benefiting me? Or is this emotion going to lead me down a path where I engage in a harmful behavior? Right? Now, that doesn't say we are repressing our emotions, especially emotions like sadness and discomfort, right? But we're recognizing them for what they are, and we're not allowing them to overrule our life. And we're seeing that some of those emotions, like attachment, is always going to be harmful. Anger is always going to be harmful. Something like sadness, that's not always harmful, right? But then where is that sadness coming from? And is that sadness temporary, or is it overwhelming us and then becoming an obstacle to us engaging in a meaningful life? And in that case, then we can look at that sadness and say, how is the sadness? Where is it coming from? Is it benefiting me? What can I do to transform it into something else? So some of our emotions, they're not all harmful, but they if they're not working for us, then they're the ones controlling us, and that's harmful. So we need to take control over our minds. And meditation does that. It gives us the space that we can observe things. I will say, you know, looking at the way the world is right now, I often wonder, is meditation enough? When the world's on fire, is me meditating by myself doing anything? Or maybe it's incredibly selfish for me to just be sitting around meditating by myself when there's so much injustice around the world, in my community, even, right? Not just far away, but like in my very community, there's this injustice. And is there a selfishness to engaging in this private practice? I think the truth is we need to make sure our priority is always to benefit others and recognize that our acts of meditation, our private spiritual practice, is the primary way we can serve others. But that doesn't mean we don't serve them in a worldly way as well. We have to acknowledge what resources and what abilities we have and make the best use of them, both in a spiritual sense and a worldly sense. So if we have the means, the resources, the ability to engage in direct interaction with others to help fight against oppression, to help others in a meaningful worldly way, we should do it, right? The Buddha says if you have the means to help others in any way, you should help them. But we have to recognize that that kind of help is temporary. The real help is developing our own mind to such an extent that we can lead others out of suffering, not just to a better prison cell, right? That's what they say for those who are seeking only to have a positive rebirth, right? So the lowest type of Buddhist motivation. If you're engaging in an action with a wish to benefit this life only, then we say that's not a Buddhist motivation. If your motivation is to have a positive rebirth, then that is a Buddhist motivation, but it is the kind of least or the smallest of the types of Buddhist motivation. If your goal is to achieve personal liberation or some or nirvana or moksha, then that is a medium Buddhist motivation. And then the motivation to achieve Buddhahood for the purpose of benefiting all others is the great Buddhist motivation. That's the motivation that fuels all of our Mahayana practice. So that lowest Buddhist motivation, the wish to just have a positive rebirth, we say is like wishing to be in a jail cell that has a better view, right? So when we help others in a worldly way, we have to recognize that our help is temporary and worldly, and that is beneficial if we have the means to do it. If we see someone who's hungry and we have food to feed them, we should feed them. But that food that we feed them isn't going to liberate them from suffering, right? And so the real goal should be to train our mind in such a way that we develop the techniques, the wisdom, and the ability to actually help others be free from suffering, actually free from suffering, not just temporary suffering. So we have to do both. And when the culture and the environment is so overwhelming sometimes, not all of us have the same resources. We can't all engage in external actions to the same extent, but we can all engage in meditation, we can engage in study, and we can improve our own minds. So we use our private individual Buddhist practice to inform how we go about working in the world. We combine our compassion and our wisdom in such a way that says, I recognize these are the resources I have available to me that I can employ in such a way to help others. And I wouldn't recognize those resources if I didn't actually do inner work, right? So it's not selfish to be focusing on your own life. The whole reason we focus on our mind and improving our own life is to become a Buddha, but not for our own benefit. That's the important part. It's not because I want to be free from suffering. It's because I recognize that if I achieve Buddhahood, if I throw off all the trappings of the samsaric world, then I'd have so much greater capacity to be of service to others. So as I'm on my journey, I'll help them as much as I can. But I'm also, the main part of my practice is going to be focused on me achieving Buddhahood, which means I have to engage in this meditation practice. So it is a private practice, but it's not a selfish practice. His Holiness Dalai Lama would often say, if you're a selfish person and all you want is your own happiness, you should at least employ a type of wise selfishness, which is to say, you go help others. And that's how you can experience your own happiness, right? Because the best way to experience joy and bliss and happiness and contentment in this life is to be of service to others. So we aren't seeking out wise selfishness, right? That's not our goal. That's the bare minimum that His Holiness recommends to non-Buddhists. We are trying to do something else, but we recognize that by working on our own minds, it's putting us in a position where we have a greater understanding of what's going on in our lives, and it gives us more tools, more techniques, more wisdom that allow us to be of greater service to others in the immediate sense, in the worldly sense, and eventually in the spiritual sense as well. So meditation is not a selfish practice. It's critical, right? Think of how many times we have lived in samsara since beginning this life without focusing on our mind. And where has that gotten us? Over and over again, we've followed the samsaric impulse. We've followed the self-cherishing mind. We've allowed our ignorance and our attachment and our anger to be the guides that lead us. And all it's brought us is suffering, right? So now it's time to, revolt against those negative minds, revolt against the afflictions, the kleshas, and take control of our life. And so we do that through meditation, but also through study, Study, contemplation, and meditation are the three aspects we have to bring to everything we do. This will probably come up in the verses we cover today, but whenever we're studying whenever we're engaging with new material, the first step is to actually study, right? Or to hear or to listen is what the word is in Sanskrit and Tibetan, because traditionally the way you study is by receiving instruction from your guru. But for us, it can also mean reading in a book, or it can mean, watching a YouTube video like this. So first we study. That is how we gain new information, right? And then after that study, we engage in what's called contemplation. So contemplation is looking at whatever this new material is that we studied and seeing if we believe it, trying to understand it, trying to overcome our doubts about it and develop a sense of conviction. That we say, not only is this what I read the Buddha taught, but I understand what it means and I believe in it. And then once we have some type of conviction, we engage in what's called meditation. We allow our minds to become familiar with that Dharma topic. And as we become familiar with it, then what happens is it infiltrates our whole life, right? To meditate on something is to allow your mind to become inseparable from that topic, whatever it may be. And then the more you meditate on it, then you learn new things about it, whatever the topic is, because it's a constant process that's always moving. The more you study, then the more material you have to engage in contemplation about. And the more you engage in contemplation, you're learning new things, you're developing greater levels of conviction. That makes your meditation even stronger. And then the more you meditate, then you all of a sudden see more subtle aspects of that same topic that allow you to have more opportunities for contemplation. So it becomes this constant virtuous cycle where you're always improving your mind by engaging in these three distinct practices of study, contemplation, and meditation. And so we need to apply these to everything we do, right? Especially our spiritual practice, but we can see it would be worldly benefit as well when we're engaging in new worldly study. But the truth is, taking these three, study, contemplation, and meditation, and applying them to our Dharma practice, to our spiritual life, allow us to see the incredible benefits of developing minds of compassion and working to benefit others. And that is the heart of this text, the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So a Bodhisattva, right, is a being, technically, who has entered into the Bodhisattva path, or the Mahayana vehicle. And they have developed an actual mind of bodhicitta. So bodhicitta is the mind that wishes to become a Buddha for the intent of benefiting others. Now, people like me don't have actual bodhicitta yet. We have a proximity to bodhicitta. We have a facsimile of bodhicitta, right? Because our bodhicitta takes effort. I have to think about it. Actual bodhicitta, when we achieve actual bodhicitta, it's effortless and it's continuous. It's always in our mental continuum. Even when a bodhisattva is asleep, they have bodhicitta. It's not active necessarily, but it's always there in their continuum. Even when a bodhisattva is in, meditative equipoise on the nature of reality, the only manifest mind they have is that deep meditation on emptiness, they still have bodhicitta, even though it's not manifest, because it's effortless and continuous in the mind of a bodhisattva. For us, we have to engage in specific meditations to cultivate it and to strengthen it and to deepen it, right? But the more we do that, the easier it becomes because we're making ourselves familiar with it, because we're making ourselves familiar with compassion. So compassion becomes our default instinct. The best way to find contentment and joy and peace in this life is to work to cultivate bodhicitta. That's what this text is teaching us. But in order to actually cultivate bodhicitta, the wish to free others from suffering, and the wish to become a Buddha in order to free others from suffering, we have to actually understand what suffering is and what the causes of suffering are. We have to understand what happiness is. If we don't understand those things, then how can we actually wish to achieve them? Freedom from suffering and the realization of pure bliss. You know, when the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, which was his first sermon, the first noble truth he taught was the truth that suffering exists. And the reason he taught that first is not because he wanted to depress everyone, you know, it's because we spend so much of our life pretending we're not suffering. And all of these things that are creating more minds of discomfort, of of dissonance in our life, minds of sorrow, we look at them and we think that they are actually going to bring us happiness. So we don't understand the level to which we're suffering. And only by understanding it can we do something about it. And the biggest aspect of suffering we don't understand, I think, for the most part, is what we call the suffering of change, which is that all the abbreviated version of that is to say that everything we experience as worldly happiness is in of itself a type of suffering. And it's a type of suffering because it is not real happiness. Real happiness is never changing, right? So the example they always give is if you're experiencing the suffering of heat and you jump into a cool lake, that experience of cold is going to feel like happiness. But all it is exchanging the suffering of heat for the suffering of cold. In that moment of change, due to the escape from the suffering of heat, it feels like happiness, but it's not. It's a different type of suffering. And if you stay in that lake, eventually, you'll no longer remember the experience of cold, of heat, and that experience of cold will just become the suffering of cold. But in that moment of change, we experience it as if it were happiness. And the problem isn't that we have small moments like that. The fact that worldly happiness exists, that's not the problem. The problem is we look at worldly happiness and then we say, this is real happiness. This external phenomena that I can grab onto is real happiness. Happiness comes when I create the conditions that allow me to grab onto it with both hands and not let go. That's the problem, right? It's wonderful that we have the opportunity to experience worldly happiness. But when we grab onto it as if it were real happiness and not a source of suffering, that's the danger. So the Buddha taught suffering first because we need to understand suffering. If we don't understand suffering, we'll have no desire to be free from it. If we don't have any desire to be free from it, then we will just continue to create the conditions that allow more and more suffering over and over again. So this text is something we should use as the fodder for our meditation, right? So what Shantideva is doing in this text is he's showing what a bodhisattva's life looks like. This is something we should aspire towards. Now we recognize that the part we're going to cover today probably is something we can do in our life. But in other sections, sometimes, especially the chapter on patience, that's everyone's favorite chapter and also one of the hardest chapters to actually live in our life. It's showing us what a bodhisattva would do. That's the ideal situation. So when we read a text like this, we should say, this is my goal of how I should live my life. I may not be able to apply it in every aspect, every moment of every day now, but that is the goal. So that's what I'm working towards. The beauty of Buddhism is that there is no external judge or creator who's saying you're doing a good job or a bad job and punishing you or rewarding you. There's no external reward or punishment. The whole point of Buddhism is to try to lead a meaningful life, to try to figure out what it means to lead a meaningful life and follow that path. So every day that we're working towards that is a day when we're doing it, when we're succeeding. We don't have to, we shouldn't expect that we're going to become a Buddha tomorrow. But as long as I'm facing in the right direction, as long as I'm trying to overcome the lifetimes of harmful mental habituations that I have cultivated, then I'm moving in the right direction. So I have to give myself enough grace to realize that it's going to take a long time to become a perfect Buddha. I don't expect myself to be perfect tomorrow. All I expect of myself is to always be moving in that direction. And depending on what obstacles I experience, sometimes I might make leaps forward, and sometimes it might be little baby steps. Sometimes it might just be that I'm looking in the right direction. I haven't even moved. That's okay. If I'm doing the best I can do, I have to be content with that. So this text, Shantideva was an 8th century master. He studied at Nalanda Monastery. And he's known for 2 texts primarily. This text, the Bodhicharyavatara, the Bodhisattva's way of life, and the Shiksha Samuchaya, the compendium of training. And the compendium of training is a commentary on the Shiksha Samuchaya Karika, which is a number of verses about how to follow the Buddha's advice. And what Shantideva has done is taken a bunch of quotations from the Buddhist teachings and used them to support these verses, right? So it's a commentary on that. So these are his 2 primary texts that we have access to. The Bodhicharyavatara that we're studying now, we can say it's split into 3 sections. The first section is teaching us how to actually develop the mind of bodhicitta. And that is the first 3 chapters in the book. So the first chapter is an introduction to bodhicitta. The second chapter is how to fully engage bodhicitta. And the third chapter is how to disclose or confess negative actions you've done. That's the main topics of those 3 chapters. So that is how we develop a mind of bodhicitta, as being taught in those 3 chapters. In the second and third chapters, we learn about the 7-limb prayer. One of our prayers that we recited this morning, after the 4 immeasurables, we recited the 7-limb prayer. The 7 limbs being the limb of prostration, offering, confession, rejoicing, requesting, beseeching, dedication, that comprise a complete spiritual practice. So those 7 limbs are taught in the second and third chapters. So of those first 3 chapters teach us how to develop the mind of bodhicitta. Then the next 3 chapters, 4, 5, and 6, which are on conscientiousness, alertness, and patience, those teach us how to protect our bodhicitta from declining. So once we have developed bodhicitta, whether it's actual bodhicitta or our facsimile of bodhicitta, our effortful bodhicitta, what do we have to do to prevent that bodhicitta from declining? That's what's taught in the next 3 chapters. And then the final section is, once we've developed bodhicitta and we've learned how to prevent it from declining, what can we do to increase it, to strengthen it, right? And that is the chapters on joyful effort and concentration and wisdom. So that's chapters 7, 8, and 9. Then the final chapter is a chapter on dedication. So it's dedication of all the merits you've accumulated through the rest of this text. So those are the 3 main sections: how to develop bodhicitta, how to protect bodhicitta, and how to then increase bodhicitta or strengthen it. And so right now we are discussing the 4th chapter, which is the first of 3 chapters that talk about how to protect bodhicitta. And the 4th chapter is on, as we mentioned, conscientiousness. And this chapter, along with the 5th chapter, which is on alertness, work together to teach the perfection of morality or ethical discipline, right? So we know that there are 6 perfections or 6 perfected activities that are the activities that are practiced by bodhisattvas. And they are the perfection of generosity and of ethical discipline, of patience, of joyful effort, of concentration, and of wisdom. And so the perfection of generosity is taught across the 2nd and 3rd chapters when they're teaching the 7-limb prayer, or the 7 limbs of the 7-limb prayer. The perfection of morality is taught across the 4th and the 5th chapters, the chapters on conscientiousness and alertness. And then the other of the perfections are taught directly, the chapter on patience, effort, concentration, and wisdom. So whenever I study this text, I want to remind myself, okay, right now I'm studying about conscientiousness. That's the main topic of this chapter. And here, conscientiousness, what it means is being aware of our actions and the minds that are motivating our actions, no matter what we do, in all of our activities. Not allowing ourselves to be mindless, to engage in autopilot, but to be always in control, right? Bakya is the term in Tibetan. Sometimes it's translated as carefulness or heedfulness as well, right? This works to protect our morality our ethical discipline. Because so often we engage in non-virtuous actions without even meaning to, because we're not in control of our minds, right? Our minds are under the control of our delusions. So we're not applying a level of conscientiousness. So this chapter is helping us understand how to be constantly aware of our situation and our environment and the way we're acting in that environment and the minds that are motivating our actions. Now, the next chapter on alertness is more specifically recognizing when our minds are distracted, when our minds are either experiencing internal distraction or external distraction, and not allowing our minds to run away and follow those distractions, but instead be focused on whatever it is that we're trying to focus on, whether it be in meditation or in our everyday life. And these two things together are how the perfection of morality is taught in this text. So that's just something I like to keep in the back of my head, that as I'm studying conscientiousness, what I'm really doing is studying how to practice the perfection of morality. And by practicing the perfection of morality, what I'm really doing is learning how to protect bodhicitta, whatever bodhicitta I've been able to cultivate or generate. So we can see how all these different levels work together. Many times when you study in the monastery, one of the ways you study is you memorize the outlines to a text. And I, famously, I'm not great at memorization. But when you memorize the outline of a text, even if you don't have the whole text memorized, you know all the different pieces of the text and how they work together. And so understanding that this chapter is the chapter that is nestled under the category of protecting bodhicitta, which itself is nestled under the category of morality, which is nestled under the category of such and such and such and such, that allows you to understand the whole, whatever you're studying, from a much broader perspective, right? It's useful. I'm having private classes with one of my teachers right now. He's the abbot of Gyume Monastery, but he happens to be at Sarah because they're on holiday. And just yesterday, we came to a new section of the text, and it said the header or the title of that section, and he said, "You have the whole outline memorized?" And I was like, "No, Genla, sorry." And he goes, "Ta ta 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 ta," very disappointed. I didn't have the whole outline memorized, because memorizing it is really useful, right? While you're studying, and then when you're trying to remember the text, both. It keeps it fresher in your mind. So I try to, at least if I don't have it memorized, remind myself when I'm engaging in the study of a text, where does this particular verse or set of verses fall in the bigger picture? And so what we're studying now, we made it up through verse 20 last time, right? And so verse 20 and up through the last couple of verses that were leading up to verse 20, we're discussing the importance of recognizing our perfect human rebirth, as well as recognizing death and impermanence, right? So if we look at verse 20, we see that verse 20 itself is referencing this famous teaching from the Buddha, that the likelihood of being born as a human with a perfect human rebirth is the same as being born, or rather, the comparison is if the whole world was a giant ocean and there was no land, and in that ocean there lived one giant turtle who was blind, and every 100 years that turtle came up for a breath of air. And on the surface of that ocean, being tossed around by the waves, was an ox's yoke, the frame that goes around an ox so it can drag a cart. The likelihood of that turtle surfacing in the center of that ox's yoke is more likely than us being reborn as a human with a perfect human rebirth. So that's how incredibly rare it is to be reborn as a human. And so these two topics, death and impermanence and the perfect human rebirth, were what we ended with last time, but we only touched on them in brief. So I thought we'd talk a little bit more about them today, specifically a little more about the perfect human rebirth. We'll do it in brief because, we have done classes where we'll do 6 weeks on death and impermanence and 6 weeks worth of classes on perfect human rebirth. So today we're just going to have, a little bit of a very quick in and out. But I want to give us the context, because a text like this, when the audience that he's teaching to will already have learned this material. So as soon as you see a verse like this, or you see references to perfect human rebirth or to death and impermanence, it's reinforcing things you've already studied, right? So you bring yourself to the text, which means everything you've studied, everything you've practiced, everything you meditated on, you bring it with you to the text whenever you engage in a text. That's why every time you study a text, you can get something new out of it because you've changed in between your first time studying it and your second time studying it. You've meditated more, you've increased your mind, you've increased your ability to understand what's going on. So by bringing yourself fully to these texts, even though this text was written in the 8th century, the text itself can have a dynamic relationship with us, right? The text isn't static. The text is always constantly evolving to meet the needs of the audience if you're able to develop an intimate type of relationship with it. So the audience would already have this type of understanding. So first, let's just remind ourselves of why we study death and impermanence and perfect human rebirth. And the reason we study them, and the reason they come at the beginning of Atisha's organization of all the topics of the Buddha into his Lamrim, right? They come first. And the reason is we need to be motivated to practice, right? So when we study the perfect human rebirth, that makes us realize how incredibly fortunate we are. The fact that we have the capacity to engage in a spiritual practice right now is so rare that even regardless of however many obstacles we may be experiencing in our life, which can be valid and true and legitimate, whatever obstacles we may have, we still have an opportunity like we've never had before, a very rare opportunity, right? So we meditate on a perfect human rebirth to encourage us to engage in Dharma practice, to help push us towards spiritual practice by realizing that it's an opportunity that we very rarely have. And we recognize it as being very rare because we can look at all the beings around us who don't have the opportunity to engage in this type of practice. Never mind animals alone. Look at the animals on Earth alone who aren't able to practice Dharma because their minds are too filled with attachment and ignorance. The number of animals far outnumbers the number of humans on Earth alone, right? So even just numerically, we can see that it's more likely for a being to have a birth as an animal than it would be to have a birth as a human. And that's not even to say not just a human, but a human that is actually engaging in spiritual practice like this. So just for that one type of reasoning alone, we can see how rare it is. So recognizing that rarity, it encourages us to make the most of this life and to actually enter into spiritual practice. And then the reason we focus on death and impermanence and meditate on that is because once we've developed the mind that says it's a good idea to engage in spiritual practice, it's very easy to be like, well, I'll do it tomorrow though. You know, like yes, it's very rare that I have a human life, but I'm not that old. I still have many years ahead of me probably. So why should I bother doing it now when I could go to the movies, right? Why should I practice now when I could go have a nice piece of cake? No, I should do it later. I have plenty of time, right? So we've developed conviction that there's importance to practicing Dharma, but we don't have the motivation to do it right now. So then when we study death and impermanence, that reminds us, you have no guarantee that you're going to live beyond this evening. We all assume we're going to go to bed tonight and wake up tomorrow, but there's no promise for that. And so why am I putting off till tomorrow what I could be doing right now? I could be engaging in virtue right now, but instead I'm putting it off. Why would I ever do that? If I really understood how rare and precious this life was and how ephemeral it was, how likely it is for it to end at any moment, then I would never put off practicing virtue. So the way we study death and impermanence is specifically we look at there's a number of different ways we meditate on it. The most common way is what we call the 9-round meditation. The 9-round meditation looks at 3 key root ideas, and then it has 3 characteristics to each of them. And so we're not going to do that full meditation today, though I know that sometimes during the weekly meditations, the 9-round death meditation is one that is done quite often. But so we can just look at those 3 aspects, the 3 root beliefs we have to cultivate. The first is that death is certain, right? And that sounds silly to say out loud, but we often act like we're not going to die, right? Death is certain. It's guaranteed. It's the nature of being a samsaric being. We don't know anyone that hasn't died. That's without going to elaborate. Death is certain. The second important topic or important point is that the time of death is uncertain. We believe we might live long and fruitful lives, but babies die in the womb or they die as young children. There's no guarantee how long we're going to live, right? There's no promise that you're going to get 100 years. And this, again, is really easy to understand intellectually. but it's the most difficult one to have a meaningful experiential understanding of. Because if we did, we would never not practice Dharma. That's the truth. It's very easy to have an intellectual understanding of the fact that, yes, I'm going to die, and it could be tomorrow, but it probably won't be. Intellectually, we understand that. We don't have any experiential or emotional understanding of it, because if we did, we would only be practicing Dharma. Now, that doesn't mean we'd be sitting in a temple meditating all day, right? That's not what I mean with practicing Dharma. It means aligning our life and our virtues and our motivations such that everything we do is for the benefit of others. That might still mean going to work, going to school, dealing with your family. It doesn't mean everyone's going to give away all their possessions and move to a monastery or go live in a cave. That's not what it means to practice Dharma. To practice Dharma means to renounce samsara. That's what it means to practice Dharma. By renouncing samsara, you're giving up your attachment to this life. That doesn't mean you're giving up your experiences of this life, right? So death is certain. The time of death is uncertain. And the only thing that will benefit us when we die is our Dharma practice. That's it. Our friends, our family, they won't benefit us. Whatever wealth we've accumulated, it won't benefit us. Even our own bodies will no longer be of any benefit to us. The only thing that will benefit us is whatever Dharma practice we've done and whatever virtue we've accumulated as a result of that Dharma practice. Whatever ability to tame our mind that we have cultivated and trained in. That's what will benefit us at the moment of our deaths. So when we focus on death and impermanence, these are the three main topics that we meditate on. The fact that we are definitely going to die. There is no guarantee when that will happen. And when it does happen, the only thing that will help us is whatever practice we have cultivated until then, whatever virtue we have managed to infuse into our minds, whatever spiritual development we have accumulated. So that's death and impermanence. We spoke about this briefly last week. Today, I wanted to talk just a little more in depth about the perfect human rebirth. Generally, perfect human rebirth is taught before death and impermanence. Shantideva's text has one verse on death and impermanence, and then about 6 or 7 verses on the perfect human rebirth. And they kind of are mixed together. In general, perfect human rebirth, we say, is not just being reborn as a human, but it's being born as a human that has the 8 freedoms and the 10 richnesses, or the 10 endowments, it's sometimes called. So the 8 freedoms are 8 things, or 8 undesirable states that we're free from. That's what it means to have a freedom from that. And then the 10 endowments are the 10 things that we do have that are desirable. And to be fair, most of these overlap, but the 8 freedoms, we look at them as there are 4 that are external, or they have to do with our birth, and 4 that have to do with the kinds of circumstances. So the first 4 freedoms is that we're free from being reborn as a hell being, or a hungry ghost, or an animal, and we're free from being born as a long life god, right? So those 4 types of rebirth that are not conducive to engaging in spiritual practice. So the 3 lower rebirths, a hell being, a hungry ghost, or preta, or an animal, and then a long life god. And long life gods specifically, they don't experience physical discomfort. They only experience bliss until the moment of their death. And as they get closer to the moment of their death, their bodies actually start to rot and smell bad. And so all the other long life gods create distance. They don't want to be near them. And part of being born as a long life god is you have the ability to see where your next birth is going to be. That's just part of that, of the karma that ripens as the birth as a long life god. Part of that karma is the ability to see your future birth. And so as they get closer to the moment of their death, their whole lives have been filled with physical bliss only. They haven't even thought of suffering. And as a result, they've exhausted so much of their positive karma that when it comes to die, they look into their future rebirths and they're going to be reborn in a lower realm because they've exhausted all the karma that would cause them to be reborn again as a god. And so that experience of mental anguish at the moment of their death is so, or not even at the moment of their death, but leading up to their death, is so overwhelming that it is something that we can't even comprehend. But up until that moment, their lives are so filled with bliss that they have no motivation or interest in practicing any sort of spiritual path, right? Because they don't conceptualize the idea of suffering until it's too late to do anything about it. So the first 4 freedoms are being free of being born in a state where we don't have access to practice a spiritual path, and specifically the teachings of the Buddha, right? Now, the next four freedoms are freedoms that of the conditions that we are born in. So the first one is that we're born free from having wrong views or innate wrong views. Now, especially those of us who weren't born Buddhist, we may have been born into a community where we did cultivate wrong views, such as the fact that the examples they give for wrong views in this case are the idea that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are not the only authentic sources of refuge, or that karma and its results don't really exist, right? These are ideas of wrong views. We may have been born and taught those views, especially if we weren't born Buddhist. However, they aren't so innate that we aren't able to overcome them and recognize them as folly, right? So even if we were born into a culture or environment or religious tradition that taught us those wrong views, the fact that we're able to not grasp onto them as if they were true now suggests that we aren't born with innate quality of these wrong views. In addition to wrong views, we aren't born in what is often, depending on the translation, the nicer translations say we are not born in a borderland. The more traditional translations say we're not born in a barbaric country. And what that means is we're not born in a place where we don't have the freedom to practice a spiritual path as we like. That's what that means. Um, and then we're not born at a time when the Buddha did not appear. So we aren't born at a time when there's an active Buddha, right? We say His Holiness Dalai Lama is a Buddha, but he's not what is called a supreme emanation being. He's an emanation being, but not a supreme emanation being. A supreme emanation being is a Buddha that takes the aspect of being born as into a royal family, abandoning that royal family, and then achieving Buddhahood in this life, and then turning the wheel of Dharma as a newly realized Buddha in this life. Showing those aspects and that display of achieving Buddhahood is what is called a supreme emanation being, such as Shakyamuni Buddha. So we don't have the karma to be born in the same lifetime as a supreme emanation being, but we do have the karma to have been born at a time when that Buddha did exist. So in this cycle, this world cycle, a Buddha like that did exist, and we have the fortune or the freedom of being born at a time when such a Buddha existed. And so that is to say, we're free from being born at a time when such a Buddha did not appear. Since this is a freedom, it's always a negative that we're being free from. So we're free from being born at a time when a Buddha did not appear. And lastly, we're free from being born either mute or with incomplete senses, both mental and physical senses. And the reason that's important is because if we're mute, it is one way that we're not able to actually accumulate merit, right? So it isn't to say that people that are mute or have other types of disability, whether they're mental disability or physical disability, can't practice Dharma. That's not what it means. But it means that they have different obstacles. They have more obstacles to practice than people that are born free from those disabilities have. So being born mute and being born without complete control of our senses serves as an obstacle to practice Dharma completely with our whole body, speech, and mind. And so therefore we are free of that obstacle. And then so those are the 8 freedoms, right? 4 that are pertaining to the birth we've taken, and 4 that are pertaining to the environment that we're born into, or our experience of that birth. And then the 10 freedoms, the 10 richnesses or endowments, depending on how you want to translate it. There are 5 of these that are personal and 5 that are environmental. So the 5 personal ones are that we are born a human. We are born in what is called a central country as opposed to a border country, which is to say we're born in a country or a place, an environment where we have the capacity to engage in a spiritual practice of our own choosing. We're born with sound senses or sense faculties. We are born free from extreme views. And what this means, again, similar to the wrong views we talked about earlier, extreme views are the views of either nihilism, that nothing matters at all, which is to say karma doesn't exist and that nothing at all matters, nothing is real at all. And then the view of eternalism that says everything exists exactly the way it appears to us, and there is nothing that does not exist in the way it appears. So those are the 2 extremes that the teachings of the Buddha are in the center of. That's why it's called the middle way between those 2 extremes. And again, we may have been born into an environment where we were taught some version of that, and we may have even believed it, but it is not so innate that we aren't able to see the folly of it and let it go. So we're free from the extremes. We're the richness that is not endowed with either extreme view. And then the last of the first 5 personal endowments is that we have faith in the Dharma. We have conviction that the teachings of the Buddha are beneficial, right? So these 5 richnesses are personal richnesses that we have. And then we have the 5 richnesses that are environmental. And these are simply that a Buddha has appeared in this world, and in this time that we exist. Not only has a Buddha appeared, but that Buddha has taught. And the teachings that Buddha taught have flourished and have spread. And not only have they spread, but there are followers who are practicing those teachings. And there are kind teachers who are sharing those teachings. So those are the 5 environmental richnesses or endowments, that a Buddha has appeared, that we are born at a time and into a body and place where a Buddha has appeared, a Buddha has taught, those teachings have flourished, those teachings have followers and devotees, and there are kind teachers who are disseminating and sharing those teachings. So these 10 make up the 10 richnesses. And combined, we say these are the 18 qualities of a perfect human rebirth. Though if you're really doing the math, most of the freedoms, I think, can be condensed into the 10 richnesses as well, right? They overlap. But we look at it from both sides because that inspires a different level of understanding and a different freedom. I mean, a different level of realization. One is that we're free from something, and one is that we have something, right? So understanding it from both those directions helps us become more familiar with it and helps us appreciate it at a deeper level. So that's why it's taught that way. Now, the important thing is how do we actually transform an intellectual understanding of our perfect human rebirth into an emotional or an experiential understanding of it, right? How do we make it instinctual? And that is what some of these verses are. So why don't we jump into the next section? And to the next section, starting with verse 21. Now, again, if I'm talking about the outlines, this outline from verse 21 to verse 27 of this chapter is called How to Apply Conscientiousness with Regard to Cultivating Virtue, right? So now that we recognize that we have a perfect human rebirth, we want to use that rebirth to cultivate virtue. And we use this chapter on conscientiousness we apply conscientiousness to the cultivating of virtue. So why don't we go ahead and read together all of these verses, 21 through 27, and then I'll go back and we'll go through them one at a time. Because this constitutes the next section of how to be conscientious with regard to cultivating virtue. If, even by the evil of one instant, an aeon may be spent in the deepest hell, then because of the evil I have gathered since beginning this time, what need to mention my not going to a happy realm? But having experienced merely that rebirth in hell, I shall still not be liberated, for while it is being experienced, other evil will be extensively produced. So, if, when having found leisure such as this, I do not attune myself to what is wholesome, there could be no greater deception, and there could be no greater folly. And if, having understood this, I still foolishly continue to be slothful when the hour of death arrives, tremendous grief will rear its head. Then, if my body blazes for a long time in the unbearable flames of hell, inevitably my mind will be tormented by the fires of unendurable remorse. Having found by some coincidence this beneficial state that is so hard to find, if now, while able to discriminate, I once again am led into the hells, then, as though I were hypnotized by a spell, I shall reduce this mind to nothing. Even if I do not know what is causing me confusion, what is there dwelling inside? Even I do not know what is causing me confusion. What is there that is dwelling inside me? So, as I said, these verses, coming after verses that are talking about the perfect human rebirth and how we use that rebirth to cultivate bodhicitta and then make sure our bodhicitta does not decline. These are saying now, how do we use that to cultivate virtue? And these are teaching us the importance of a perfect human rebirth towards cultivating virtue. So this first verse here, right? If even by the evil of one instant an aeon may be spent in the deepest hell, then because of the evil I've gathered since beginningless time, what need is there to mention my not going to a happy realm? So this is recognizing that if we look at our life now, just this one life, how many misdeeds have we done? How often have we allowed ourselves to engage in non-virtue, right? And we can, if you're like me, you'll see that over and over again in this life. I followed non-virtue, maybe not the heaviest of non-virtues, such as killing, but I've definitely engaged in non-virtuous action over and over and over again. Sometimes intentionally, and sometimes because I wasn't aware that the action was harmful, right? So I wasn't conscientious of the harm. So if that's true for this life, imagine that I've done this over and over and over again since beginningless rebirths. How many negative deeds have I accumulated? And if I've accumulated so many negative deeds, then what is the chance that I'm going to be reborn into a happy rebirth? Because what this is reminding us is that one single negative deed is all it takes to be reborn in a hell realm. Now, not just any negative deed. There are different types of karma. We won't talk about it in length here, but for us to accumulate what's called a projecting karma or a propelling karma, that's the type of karma that ripens as a type of rebirth into an upper realm or a lower realm, right? So that karma has to be complete in many ways. Small actions don't necessarily create what are called propelling karma or a propelling result from karma. They might create environmental karma or completing karma like this. So it has to be an actual strong action, not an accidental action. When I walk down the street and I step on insects because I'm not even aware they're there, so I kill those insects, that is not going to be the karma that propels me to be reborn in a hell realm, right? But all it takes is one single negative action done with intention and with clear thought that can cause me to be reborn in a hell realm. So if it only takes one action, and I know that in this life I've engaged in so many harmful actions, and I can only imagine the innumerable harmful actions I've done in past lives, then of course the likelihood of being reborn in the upper realm is very slim. So because of this should not be a reason to despair, right? This should allow us to do two things. One, it compels us that we have to engage in more practices of virtue. Because at the moment of our death, the mind we have at the moment of death, generally, for most regular sentient beings, the mind we have at the moment of our death is what determines where we're going to be reborn next. So we've planted the seeds to have positive rebirths and negative rebirths. We have both of those seeds within our mental continuum. And what matters is which of those is activated, right? And they say that the activating factor is the quality of mind we have at the moment of death. If we die with a mind that is engaging in spiritual practice and is light and is buoyant and is joyful and is not filled with fear and is filled with spiritual excitement, then that is going to be a mind that activates a karmic seed that is birth into an upper realm. But if our minds are filled with fear and despair and anger or any of these negative emotions, then that's going to activate a negative karmic seed. So what do we want to do? We want to have as many positive seeds possible. So that means we engage in as much virtue as possible to better our chances that we'll have these karmic seeds available and ready to be activated. But not only that, we want to help eliminate those negative seeds we have planted, right? And the way we do that is we engage in actions of purification. We engage in purification practice. So purification practice, we can't undo the past. We've already created these negative seeds. We've planted them already. But what we can do is we can neuter them, essentially. We can take away their power. We can make it so that even though we have planted these negative seeds, they have no capacity to actually grow into anything. So the example they gave is, if we're using the analogy of a seed, if you put a flame under that seed, you burn it up. So that seed might still exist, but you have made it impossible for that seed to grow anything. Even if it's planted in the ripest, most perfect soil with the best conditions, it can't grow because you've made it, you've stripped it of its capacity to actually grow. So that is the equivalent of what we want to do to whatever negative seeds you've already planted. And the way we do that is we employ what we call a purification that has the 4 opponent powers, right? So in order to fully purify these negative actions we've accumulated from the past, we have to rely on these 4 different powers to do so. So the first power is often translated as the power of reliance. And what this really means is generating a mind of bodhicitta and a mind of refuge, right? So we rely upon those objects against which we've created negative karma. That's why it's called reliance. So we've created negative karma with regard to holy beings, such as Buddhas and the Dharma, and we create negative karma with regard to regular sentient beings as well. And so we rely on the Buddha and the Dharma by engaging a mind of refuge. That shows our reliance on the Buddha and Dharma. And we rely upon the sentient beings who we have harmed in the past by generating a mind of bodhicitta that wishes to free them from suffering, right? So that is the mind of reliance, or the power of reliance is generating a mind of refuge and generating a mind of bodhicitta. So that's the entryway into the four opponent powers. And then we have the power of regret. So the power of regret is we recognize these negative actions we've done, whether they're specific negative actions we remember doing in this life, or the conviction that we've engaged in those negative actions countless times in the past, even if we don't remember the specific details. We develop genuine minds of regret. This is maybe all four opponent powers are important, but this one is really important. Regret is critical, right? And regret is not guilt. Regret is not saying I'm a bad person because I engaged in this harmful activity, but it's a recognition that this activity was harmful. And therefore, since it was non-virtuous, it can only have deleterious results, right? Results that are suffering for myself or for others. And so therefore, I regret that I've created the causes for suffering, both immediate suffering and suffering in the future. Regret is an interesting mental factor because it is one of the few mental factors that we call changeable, right? So regret can be virtuous or non-virtuous depending on the object of your regret. When you regret engaging in harmful activities, that regret itself becomes a virtuous mind. But if you regret engaging in beneficial activities, if you regret attending a Dharma teaching or you regret a morning meditation session, then that regret becomes a non-virtuous mind. So regret itself is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. It is neutral and what we call changeable, one of the changeable mental factors, depending upon the object of our regret. So here, as an opponent power, we want our regret to be incredibly strong and to be focused on all the negative actions we've done in this life and in all past lives. Even if we don't remember engaging in those negative actions, we can have a level of conviction that we have. If we have been born numberless times over and over again, then of course we've engaged in these negative actions. Simply because we don't remember it doesn't mean we haven't done it. How many things have we done in this life that we don't remember? Most of us can't remember what we had for breakfast last week, never mind all the actions we've done in this life. So of course we can't remember all the negative actions we've done, but we can still generate a genuine mind of regret regarding those actions. And now, after we have developed the powers of reliance and regret, next we have to actually do the remedy. That's the third power, the power of the remedy. And there are some very traditional purification practices, such as reciting the Vajrasattva mantra and doing the visualization that goes along with that. But really, any virtuous activity can serve as a remedy for negative karma you've created. Any virtuous activity. And quite often, we're encouraged to engage in a virtuous activity that is opposite of whatever negative karma we created, right? So if we're specifically trying to purify negative karma of stealing, then the remedy you want to employ might be a remedy of generosity, for instance, right? But there are also more general remedies we employ, such as reciting Vajrasattva mantra or engaging in any virtuous activity. So any virtuous activity can be the remedy, but it has to be intentional, right? So we have reliance, we have regret, we have remedy, and lastly, we have what is called resolve. So now that we have actually engaged in a purification practice and we've employed a remedy, we resolve that we will never again repeat those negative actions that create negative karma. We'll never again follow non-virtuous minds. And now, depending on the action and depending on our circumstances in life, we may not be able to make that promise that I'll never do this again, ever in this life, right? So what's more important is to make a promise that you don't break. So the way Lama Zopa Rinpoche would teach it is he'd say all those things that I all those things I can refrain from the rest of this life, I will never again repeat. For those things that are difficult to refrain, I will refrain from for as long as possible, whether that be the rest of my life or 1 year or 1 week, or even if I can only refrain for 1 minute, I will do it that way, right? So it's better to not break your promise than it is to make these wondrous, infinite promises that you're going to break the next day. So we have to be realistic. The important thing is we set a mind of resolve that we can keep and we can uphold. That mind of resolve then takes the remedy we have practiced and it secures it, right? It makes it it makes it impenetrable in some ways. So these 4 opponent powers we should be practicing every single day, and to purify whatever immediate negative karma we've created that day, but then also to do our best to practice to purify negative karma we've created in the past. And now the truth is, actually developing minds of regret, especially, is very difficult. If it was easy, then we could do this practice once, and all of our negative karma we've created in past lives would be purified right away. But it's not that easy, unfortunately, right? Which is why we should be doing this continuously. And every time we do it, we help purify a little more, a little more, a little more negative karma. We chip away at it, basically, and we make our mind more in line with virtue, right? So if I recognize that it only takes one instant to be reborn, one instant of negative action to be reborn in a hell realm, then that should cause me to have the fear that I've done so many negative actions. Of course, I'm not going to be reborn as a human again. Therefore, I should really commit myself to avoiding non-virtue and to purifying what non-virtue I have created already. So that's what this verse is teaching us. And then this next verse, I think I mentioned this last week. A lot of these verses are responding to hypothetical opponents that are asking a question, right? Or they're presenting a qualm. And for many of the chapters, that even if you don't know what the opponent is asking, the answer is kind of embedded within the verse. So it's very easy to understand. It gets much more difficult in the last chapter, or in the 9th chapter, I should say, the chapter on wisdom. That one you really have to read with a commentary because it's just hard to understand because you don't know who he's responding to. So it can be unclear what point he's trying to make sometimes. But in this chapter, it's usually very clear. So this verse is actually responding to an opponent. So our last verse, right? We have said, I'm never going to be reborn in a happy realm because I've done so much harmful things in this life and in past lives. So then an opponent says, well, once you're born into a negative realm, then you will have exhausted that karma. The karma that causes you to be reborn in a negative realm, once it ripens and is exhausted, then you'll have completed it. And then when you die in that negative realm, whatever it may be, then you'll be again reborn in an upper realm. So you really shouldn't worry about it, right? What's the point of worrying about creating negative karma? Because it ripens once and then it's exhausted. That's the opponent's position. And so the answer is, well, once I'm reborn in that lower realm, whether it be a hell realm or an animal realm or a hungry ghost realm, I won't be liberated because in that realm, it'll be so difficult to be producing, to be engaging in virtue. All I'll be doing is creating more and more non-virtuous seeds, right? While that lower rebirth is being experienced, other evil, here evil is just, it's a translation of the word negativity, right? Other negative actions will be extensively produced. That's the real danger of being reborn into a lower realm. Of course, lower realm rebirths, not counting animals, hell beings and hungry ghosts, we say their rebirth, their lifespans are longer than a human lifespan. So that, is no fun. But even with that, their lifespan does end. And that karma of being reborn that way is exhausted. But the real danger is that while you're in one of those lower rebirths, you're constantly creating more negative karma. So it becomes this negative feedback loop, right? That becomes really, really hard to break out of. That's the real danger. Being reborn in a lower realm once, if that's all it was, would be wildly unpleasant. But, it's only one rebirth. But the problem is, it's not just like that. The problem is, once you're reborn there, it's very hard to get out of that quagmire you've created because you're constantly creating more and more and more negative karma, right? It's not impossible. Obviously, we've all been in past lives born in those lower realms, and we have been able to be free of those lower realms that we're now reborn as a human. So it's not impossible, right? Eventually, all the lower realms will be emptied. Eventually, all sentient beings will become Buddhists. It's not impossible, but it is very difficult, right? So if you think that it's not a big deal if I engage in negative actions now, or if I don't purify the negative actions I've done, because they may ripen as an animal rebirth or a lower realm rebirth, but once they ripen, they'll be exhausted and it won't matter anymore. That's not the case. Because when they ripen, they become a cause for you to create more and more and more negative karma, right? So that's what this verse is reminding us of. It's responding to an opponent who suggests that it doesn't matter, and it's giving us the reason why. So now, once we have attenuated our mind to this fact that we've created the causes to be reborn in lower realms again and again, and being reborn there will just become its own cause for more and more rebirths, then we should be aligning ourselves instead with virtue. So the next verse says, if, when having found leisure, such as this, which is to say this perfect human right, this perfect human rebirth, endowed with the 18 freedoms and endowments, if I do not attune myself to what is wholesome, which is to say, if I do not familiarize myself with virtue, then there could be no greater deception, and there could be no greater folly. Now, here, the word folly is a strange translation. Other translations often translate this as no greater source of confusion, right? And what this means is, when I have found this perfect, then if I don't actually use it to align my life with a life that is dedicated to following virtue, to familiarize myself with virtue, with what is wholesome, there's no greater way I could harm myself, that I could lie to myself. And the greatest folly or the greatest confusion is to not be aware of what I need to adopt and what I need to abandon in this life in order to be living a meaningful and virtuous life, right? So to familiarize ourselves with virtue, it means we need to create new habits. We need to look at our habitual tendencies, both our worldly habits and our kind of ingrained habits that we have innate from our birth in samsara. And we need to recognize those habits are harming us, that they're not aligned with virtue, but they're instead aligned with the self-cherishing mind. They're aligned with worldly pleasure and not spiritual delight. And as a result of that, we have to create new habits to become familiar with virtue, right? So rejoicing is one of the best ways to align ourselves with virtue. Whenever we look at either people experiencing the result of positive karma ripening, or we see people engaging in virtuous activities, we develop a mind of joy in response to that virtue. That creates the habit of continually creating more and more virtue. So we want to become familiar with virtue. We want virtue and virtuous activities to be our instinctual response, no matter the circumstance. What this is showing us is that the practice of ethical discipline is not just a practice of proscription, of not engaging in harmful activity, but it's also prescription, engaging in virtuous activity, right? So it's not just what you don't do, it's what you do as well. So when you look at the different types of morality, we generally say there are the general division of the perfection of morality is divided into three. It's the perfection of morality that is protecting your commitments and your vows, and there is the morality of engaging in virtue, and then the morality of benefiting others. So one is morality of not engaging in non-virtue, essentially, and protecting whatever vows you have taken, whether they be the vows of individual liberation, or the Bodhisattva vows, or the tantric vows. And then the next, so one is that proscriptive. We're not doing these non-virtuous things, and we're protecting ourselves from non-virtue. But then the next type of morality is engaging in virtue, and then working for the benefit of others, which often is simultaneous with engaging in virtue, right? So morality is not just not doing things. Morality is proactive as well. So when we live a life that is endowed with these 18 aspects of a perfect human rebirth, but we're not actively seeking out virtue, that is being deceptive to ourselves, because it is ignoring how much work it took for us to be reborn with a perfect human rebirth. They say that one of the primary causes to have a perfect human rebirth is having stainless morality, right? So think in this life, if your morality is stainless. And if it isn't, then it means you're probably not creating the perfect condition for a perfect human rebirth. So how hard is it to live with stainless morality? We realize how difficult it is. And yet, we've done that in the past because we created the conditions that allow us to have this perfect human rebirth now. So it must have taken so much effort, so much work to have the stainless morality coupled with stainless prayers to allow us to be reborn as a human with a perfect human rebirth. We already exhausted so much effort and energy into achieving this. If we aren't cognizant of that, we don't remind ourselves of how much energy in past lives we have put towards achieving this, then we just waste it, right? So that's lying to ourselves. That's being ignorant of the many, many causes it takes that we have to cultivate in order to have a perfect rebirth. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of blood, sweat, and tears, essentially. Well, those blood, sweat, and tears is just to say practicing virtue and avoiding non-virtue. Also, when we have this perfect human rebirth and we are not fully aligning ourselves in a life that is seeking out virtue, it deceives us by ignoring the reality of karma and its results, right? Ignoring the fact that our actions, if they aren't aligned with virtue, are only going to create suffering for ourselves and others in the future. So it is deceiving ourselves to believe that worldly happiness is real happiness, that temporary gain is the same as the gain of Buddhahood, and so forth, right? So it is deceiving ourselves by what is valuable and what is not valuable. So it's focused only on this life, right? If our lives are not motivated by virtue, then we're focused only on this life. And when we focus only on this life, then that is nothing but the self-cherishing mind writ large. And the self-cherishing mind does nothing but cause suffering. That's all it does. And all of its many permutations. It's easy to be deceived by the self-cherishing mind because the self-cherishing mind says, I want what's best for you. I want you to be happy. I want you to have fame or popularity. I want you to have pleasure. So the self-cherishing mind tells us. So it's easy, very easy to be deceived by it. All it does is bring suffering. That's all the self-cherishing mind does. Anything motivated by the belief that my happiness is more important than your happiness, anything motivated by that or any of its permutations does nothing but bring suffering, primarily for myself, but then also for others as well. So when we don't accept this, that's what it means to be deceitful to ourselves. And then lastly, this last line, there could be no greater folly, no greater confusion regarding what it is we need to abandon and what it is we need to adopt. So in this regard, we understand the things we need to abandon are the 10 non-virtuous actions, and what we need to adopt are the 10 virtuous actions. Now, the 10 non-virtuous actions don't include, there are non-virtuous things that exist that don't exist within the 10 non-virtues, if that makes sense. They aren't an exhaustive list, but they are the core non-virtuous actions that we have to be aware of. And then we can see everything else as derivations of them quite often. So the 10 non-virtues are the 3 non-virtues of body, the 4 of speech, and the 3 of mind, right? So the 3 non-virtues of body, going from heaviest to lightest, is the non-virtue of killing, the non-virtue of stealing, and the non-virtue of sexual misconduct. And then the 4 non-virtues of speech, again going from heaviest to lightest, is the non-virtue of lying, of engaging in divisive speech, engaging in harsh speech or rough speech, and then idle chatter or gossip is the 4th. And then the 3 non-virtues of mind, going from lightest to heaviest, so they go in the reverse order. The first one is a mind of envy or covetousness. The second is a mind of malice or wishing harm upon others. And the last is a wrong view, such as believing that karma is not real or that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha are not the only authentic sources of refuge, and so on. Any of those 10 are only non-virtuous. Okay? That is why they're the 10 non-virtuous actions, because they're always non-virtuous. There's no wiggle room there. Now, they're not all the same level of non-virtue. As I said, some are heavier, some are lighter, but they're always non-virtuous. And we lose sight of the fact that those things are what we need to be constantly rejecting, abandoning, those and all of their permutations. And the things we need to adopt are their opposites, right? So the 10 virtuous minds, or the 10 virtuous actions rather, are just adopting a mind of non-killing, a mind of not lying, of only telling the truth, a mind that always endeavors to not engage in sexual misconduct, and so forth. So all 10 of those, the opposite of them, not just the lack of engaging in non-virtue, but the active pursuit of the opposite of that non-virtue are the 10 virtuous minds, or the 10 virtuous dharmas, the 10 virtuous karmas, or activities. The word for activity and the word for karma is the same in both Sanskrit and Tibetan. Karma comes from the verb root kr, which means to do, to make, to create, right? And so a karta is an agent, someone doing something, and then a karma is the thing that is done. So it's an activity. And so in Tibetan, the word is lay. It means the same thing. And we translate it as karma or even just a worldly activity. Like an office is a leka, homework, nang le, inner work is homework that you get from school. So we don't have to think of karma as this like mystical thing, right? It's our actions, our activities. So we have to be clear about what we need to be abandoning and what we need to be adopting. Now, continuing, it's getting late. I think I'm going to probably follow my own bad habit and we'll have a rushed meditation today, if at all. But I want to at least finish out this section and then leave time for questions. So we'll see if we have time for meditation. But continuing in the next verse, 24. If, having understood this, I still foolishly continue to be slothful, then when the hour of death arrives, tremendous grief will rear its head, right? So laziness is one of the most deceptive of the afflicted minds, because there's different types of laziness. The most common laziness is the laziness of procrastination. That's the one we're used to, right? But that's the one that colloquially, when we think of laziness, that's what we think about. But the other two types of laziness that are more insidious, I think. One is the laziness of seeking out non-Dharma activities. So we may be very active. We may be running around, always busy, but we're not engaging in Dharma. We're busy chasing worldly activities. That is itself a type of laziness. It's the laziness that is abandoning Dharma practice, right? So it may seem like we're not lazy. We may be chugging Red Bulls and only sleeping 4 hours a night. That doesn't mean we're not being lazy. It just means that we are seeking out excitement for non-virtue, or rather non-Dharma. And then the third type of laziness is the laziness of having a mind of defeatism that says, I'm not good enough to engage in the Dharma practice, so it's not worth it. Or I'm never going to become Buddha in this life, so it's not even worth practicing, right? The laziness of giving up before you actually try. That kind of laziness prevents us from practicing any sort of effort. So these three types of laziness are very dangerous, right? Because they don't only just poison our immediate moment, but they poison the future practice as well. So what this is saying is, if I actually understand how rare it is to have a perfect human rebirth, how incredibly fortunate I am, and yet, even with that awareness, I don't practice, then when I die, it's going to be an even greater sense of grief and loss, because I'll know what I could have been doing. And so the remorse I have and the grief I have at that moment will be overwhelming, right? Sometimes if we don't know something, then you don't have as much, you don't have that same sense of loss. But here it's saying the very fact that I understand how rare and precious it is to have this perfect human rebirth means that if I don't use it to its full extent, then when I die and I look back at my life and I realize that I wasted so much of my great potential, then my grief at that moment will be even stronger, right? So it's kind of like, so by learning about perfect human rebirth, it's kind of like giving yourself a poison seed, now that you've learned about it, if you don't actually do something about it, then you've made the case that you might have more grief in the future. So therefore you have to actually, meditate on it and incorporate that meditation into your everyday life. And the truth is, right, bodhicitta and the bodhisattva vows, we look at the 18 root bodhisattva vows and the 46 branch vows, they encompass all virtuous practice. They encompass all activities that align with Buddhahood, right? Even just bodhicitta alone encompasses all virtue. So if our primary concern is developing bodhicitta, then by focusing on that, naturally, we're going to be avoiding non-virtue and we're going to be adopting virtue. So we don't study this topic to let our minds be overwhelmed with anxiety and fear. We study it so we have a clear understanding of the situation that we're in, right? And by having a clear understanding, it gives us the capacity to do something about it. And the practice of bodhicitta, of actively trying to cultivate the mind that wishes to become Buddha in order to benefit all others, is always going to align us with virtue and with practicing virtue and avoiding non-virtue. Now, of course, we have to know what those are, but the combination of bodhicitta and studying karma allows us to always be pointed in that direction. So continuing, then, if my body blazes for a long time in the unbearable flames of hell, which is to say, going off the last verse, if I understand how incredibly rare it is to have perfect human rebirth, but I waste it, I don't use it to its full capacity, and then when I die, my mind will be overwhelmed with grief, and then I get reborn in a lower realm, and my body is blazing with the unbearable flames of hell, inevitably, my mind will then be tormented by the fires of unendurable remorse. And so here, this is showing that having regret now, or remorse, same thing, now for those negative actions is useful because it's a virtuous mind that encourages us to practice virtue. But if we're born in a hell realm, it'll be too late, right? When that negative karma has already ripened into a negative rebirth, then having remorse then is too late. We need to develop a mind of remorse and regret for negative actions now. And that mind of regret then propels us to not continue engaging in negative karma. And of course, what we regret, the mind of remorse or regret, is actions we've already done. That's true. We don't regret future actions because we haven't done them yet, right? So obviously, every moment of regret is going to be looking backwards at an action we've already accomplished, whether it be a positive, a virtuous or non-virtuous action. Yet, we still have the capacity to do something about it. That regret can be the fuel to encourage us to engage in virtue and to purify the negativities we've already created, right? As we mentioned earlier, that regret is a critical part of purification. So we have an opportunity now that our mind of regret, that virtuous mind that regrets negative action, can propel us towards Buddhahood. But if we wait until those negative actions ripen into lower rebirths, when we don't have the resources we have now, we don't have the minds that are able to discriminate between right and wrong, we don't have the luxury of being able to practice a spiritual path, then that regret won't be useful anymore. It will still be virtuous, because if you're regretting non-virtue, it's still virtuous, but it won't be effective. It won't be something we can actually put into practice. Whereas right now, that regret is useful. So if we wait until, the bad things happen, then the regret, what good does it do us, right? Continuing, the last 6 lines go together, these next 6 lines. Having found by some coincidence this beneficial state that is so hard to find, if now, while able to discriminate, I once again am led into the hells, then as though I were hypnotized by a spell, I shall reduce this mind to nothing. Now, first off, the word coincidence here is something you see a lot in Shantideva's texts and in many texts, where it's kind of a skillful means. So me being reborn with a perfect human rebirth is not a coincidence. As I mentioned, there's a lot of effort and work that goes into having a perfect human rebirth, right? Tsongkhapa says in Foundation of Local Qualities, for instance, having achieved this perfect human rebirth once that I'll never achieve again, right? So they often use this language, which is not 100% accurate according to reality, but it show the importance and the rarity of a perfect human rebirth. So here, it's saying that the word coincidence, what it's showing us is that even though we engage in virtue, there are so many other causes and conditions that have to come together for us to have a perfect human rebirth that it isn't simple or easy. And it's almost as if it's pure luck, right? That's how random it can seem, because it takes so much effort on our part. So the word here, coincidence, is really what we call a skillful means. It's a type of instruction that's a skillful means to emphasize how incredibly rare it is. So we shouldn't actually think of it as a coincidence, though. If we take that literally, then so what's the point of practice if everything is coincidence, right? So it's not to be taken literally, it's to be taken to emphasize how rare perfect human rebirth is, how difficult it is. And then we understand that if we have this opportunity to practice and we don't, it is like being under a spell, right? It is like having all the most beautiful things left in front of you and just ignoring them and pretending they're worthless, right? And why would you do that? It's because you're under a trance. And who is the hypnotist? It is your negative minds. It is your self-grasping mind. That's the hypnotist. That is not letting you take advantage of your perfect human rebirth, right? And so when I say I will reduce this mind to nothing, what that means is I will not make use of this life and this capacity I have right now for practice. My mind will be like a tree where it grows and it reacts to sunlight and water, but it doesn't actually do anything, right? So to make my mind nothing, what that means is not taking advantage of the opportunities my mind has and wasting them, just like I am under the spell of a magician. Here, the harmful magician is our self-cherishing mind and our mind that doesn't understand the nature of reality, which is to say our self-grasping mind as well. And then lastly, this section ends. Even I do not know what is causing me confusion. What is there dwelling inside me? And what this is referencing specifically is laziness. It is what is dwelling inside me is laziness. What is the reason I'm not making the most of my perfect human rebirth is because I'm lazy. It's as simple as that, really. Unfortunately, Now we could say, well, I don't recognize or I didn't understand how rare my perfect human rebirth is. So that's true. We need to have that knowledge.
But then once we have that knowledge, if we don't act on it, the only reason not to act on it is laziness, right? And so that is what he's directly referencing here, is that this is actually, again, he's responding to an opponent saying, what could there be inside of you, inside of me, that is causing me not to engage in making the most of this perfect human rebirth? And he says, what is it? Even you don't know what it is. It is laziness. But laziness itself comes from ignorance, right? Laziness comes from not understanding the nature of reality, and it comes from not understanding the rarity of a perfect human rebirth. You know, Kapchi Lama Rinpoche would say, we look at humans. I mean, excuse me, we look at animals, especially animals that are companions or that are pets, and we think their lives are luxurious, right? It would be nice to live as like a dog or a cat, that they get all the food they want. They don't have to go fight for their food. It gets given to them. People come behind them and clean up their waste. Like their lives must be great. He said, if you could actually get into the mind of a dog for just a minute, and you could perceive the world the way a dog perceives the world, or a cat or any other animal perceives the world, for just 1 minute, then you would never even go to sleep. You'd be so terrified to be reborn as an animal, because that's how terrifying their lives are. We look at their lives as maybe being lives that are easy, that are filled with whatever they want. But the truth is, their minds are pervaded by attachment and by ignorance and by fear, right? Even look at, if you own a pet, if you have a companion animal that you live with, you take good care of it, you love it, you feed it every day. So it loves you. It doesn't have anything to fear. Watch it when it eats its food. It's always looking over its shoulder. It still has this innate fear that its food is going to be taken away from it. Even if you've never harmed it, you've never given it cause to worry about that, it still has that fear because their lives are pervaded by fear, right? We don't have that experience. So Kappa Lemmas Rinpoche says, if we could get into the mind of an animal, we'd see that it doesn't actually, those minds are so much more terrifying than they look at like from the outside. And if we realize how terrifying even an animal's life was, never mind a preta or a hell being, then we would never do anything besides practice Dharma. We would never even sleep again. We'd commit ourselves to practicing Dharma. But due to our lack of understanding of how debilitating the mind is when it's in one of the three lower realms, then we allow ourselves to practice laziness instead and put off our practice of Dharma because we don't feel it is necessary or we don't feel it is critical, that we'll have time to do it sometime in the future, which shows a great ignorance of the truth that we could die at any moment, the truth of death and impermanence, and it shows a lack of recognition of how incredibly rare this perfect human rebirth is. And so the way we want to live our life as a bodhisattva is by making sure that we're aware of those two things, that our life, our opportunity to practice Dharma now is incredibly precious and rare, that it is one that we've had to do an exhaustive amount of work to achieve in past lives, and now we're experiencing the ripening result of that work. So it is rare and difficult to achieve. It's like finding a diamond in the middle of a pile of garbage, right? And then if we don't use that and we just think, I can do it later, I can practice virtue later, then that is not being aware of the fact that we have no promise for how long we're going to live. This life may last, right? So ignorance of death and rebirth and a perfect human rebirth, death and impermanence rather, and perfect human rebirth only leads to suffering. It only leads to non-virtue. But recognizing them completely gives us an opportunity to put into practice virtuous activity, to live our life like a bodhisattva. And by doing so, most importantly for this text, is we're conscientious of how incredibly rare it is and how incredibly precious our lives are. And therefore, we endeavor not to allow whatever minds of compassion and bodhicitta we have cultivated to decline, but instead do everything we can in our power to increase them more and more and protect them from declining to such a state that we would have a negative rebirth, right? So that's how that ties into this chapter.
Yeah. Geshe,
Lo,
namaste.
yes,
Yeah. Sorry, my internet went low yesterday, so
no
I asked
problem.
you a question and it got disconnected
Mm.
about the self-cherishing and the diseases I asked, right? Lifestyle
Yeah,
disorder.
yeah.
I was
Um,
not able to hear your answer for that.
so I saw that your internet got disconnected yesterday, but I did respond. So maybe I believe all the videos get saved and then eventually uploaded to YouTube. So since that isn't really pertinent to our conversation right now, maybe you
Okay.
can go back and look at that, or you can email me. Anyone can email me anytime, Gyalten
Yeah.
at CKSL.in, and I can also answer privately that way. But let's try to
Yeah.
keep,
Could you please repeat your email ID? Lekden?
I think he'll put it in the chat, but it's
I will put it in
Lekden,
chat.
so that's my name. at cksl.in.
At cksl.in.
Yeah, so I think they just posted it in the chat as well. But if anyone has questions about today's topic, that would be great. We can talk about that.
Yeah, I have today's this one regarding this Vajra Sattva mantra. Is it that Vajra Sattva mantra home? Is that the mantra?
So the one that is generally practiced as part of the purification practice is the 100-syllable mantra of Vajrasattva.
Okay, 100-syllable mantra.
Yeah, so Om Benzasattva Samaya Manapalaya Benzasattva Dinabadaba Dinamenaba Suduka Mebawa Subaka Mebawa Anarkta Mebawa Sarvasiri Mepayat Savakama Sutsme Siddhanchan Kuruhum Ha 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 Ho Bhagwan Sarvasame Munza Bhavama Maya Sanasava Ahum Pe. So it's a long one. When we study purification, we can go through that piece by piece and do it very slowly. When you practice it every day, recite it every day, it becomes very easy to recite like that. Okay. At first, it's very, very slow, and that's fine.
Yeah, thank you. And when a person is dying, a Dharma practitioner is dying, right? On the deathbed, it talks about the fire, by the fires of endurable remorse. So we have, as you said today, we have to prepare our mind every time by purification, by removing, eliminating the negative seeds and sowing the plant seeds. So at the time of death, our mind will be very peaceful. But the soul leaves before the body is cremated, right? So there won't be any pain, right?
So we say the body, so we don't believe in the idea of a soul. It's a little bit, uncommon to Buddhism, that we say anatman, there's no permanent soul, but there is a mind, right? There is a subtle mind that exists in the body. And there are different ways of understanding, but in general, for regular practitioners who don't have high levels of realization, we say the mind exists within the body for generally about 3 days after they show the coarse aspects of dying. So the aspects that contemporary Western science would interpret as death, such as the lack of respiration or the lack of electrical activity in the brain, that's like a coarse body death. We say the very subtle mind is still active at that time, and generally for about up to 3 days, often less, but sometimes up to 3 days. And there are different signs, such as small emissions of blood from the nose, and a few other things like that, that can indicate that the mind is no longer in any sort of meditative opportunity at that time and has left the body. In the case of very violent deaths, like in like car crashes and things like this, then often the mind leaves the body immediately, right away. And similarly, if you have a high level of meditative capacity and realization, your mind can stay in meditation for much longer. And when the mind's in meditation, the body won't actually rot or go putrid. So even maybe 2 years ago at Sarah, there was a monk who died, and he stayed in meditation, I think, for like 40 days or something like that. And so for 40 days, his body was upright in his room, and he had no physical signs of life. There was no breath. They didn't do any electrical EKGs, but there was no breath. There was no respiration. Yeah, his body didn't have any smell or any rot because his mind stayed in meditative equipoise for, I think, around 40 days or 38 days. So people that have high levels of realization can use that moment of death when you have escaped the coarseness of your body as a refined way of engaging in meditation. Most of us, hopefully we can do that, and Tantra practice helps us learn some techniques to do that, but most of us aren't able to do that. So for the average person, the time between their coarse body dying, the physical body dying, and the mind leaving the body is generally about 3 days or less. But that's also why when a person shows the sign of dying, we want to be very respectful of their bodies and not touch their bodies, or touch their bodies as little as possible, because that can disturb their meditative practice that they're doing, So for instance, when my mother passed away, in America, it's very hard to not touch a body after it's died, right? It's just, you have all these like medical professionals around you. So she was at home when she passed away, but we had to call the hospice care nurses who would come take care of her body. Like, we didn't have a choice. We could only put it off for so long. So after we called them, I had cloaked her body in a shroud that is covered in mantras that Lama Zopa recommends. And the first thing I did was I touched an image of the Buddha to the crown of her head, which is the highest part of her body. And so then, at least when the nurses came to touch her body, I had tried to prime it in such a way that her mind would leave through a clean exit, right? So you want to touch the top of their head and take holy objects, such as images of Buddhas or relics or Dharma teachings, and touch the crown of their head. If you have to touch the body, then that's what you want to do first. But we try to avoid touching bodies until we have signs that the mind and the body are no longer active together.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
In the future, we can have classes, we talk about the way the death process happens and the different body elements dissolve. And the Tibetans have an understanding that comes from the Indian understanding as well, taught by the Buddha, of what the stages of death are. And so by recognizing them, we can prepare our minds for them in such a way to make it less of a frightening experience. So maybe in the future, we can have classes about that as well.
Yeah. And before that, we as Dharma
Sorry,
practitioners
Shruti,
have
we've
to
had
follow
several
all these
questions from you. We have limited time for Q&A. We have a raised hand and a question in chat. Let's give room to someone else. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay, thank you. So there's another question we have?
Yeah, may I ask, Venerable?
Yes, please.
This is Madhavi here.
Hi.
You said, you told us Kabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche in the Vajrasattva practice, you said there was something he recommended as resolve. Could you please repeat it? I missed it. How should we make a resolve is what you said, what he recommended.
In general, the way it's taught is, now that I've done this negative action in the past, I regret it, and I never ever do this negative action again. Like, that's the way it's taught in most of the texts, right? And he says that's useful, but sometimes we can't keep that promise, especially depending on what the negative action is and what our circumstances are. So we should make the promise to not repeat this negative action for as long as possible, given our circumstances, right? So for instance, if you are a fisherman, which I know you're not, but if you're a fisherman, then your livelihood is made by killing animals, right? So at the end of the day, if you do a purification practice, you can't say, I'll never again kill an animal because I'm going to go tomorrow and go fishing tomorrow, right? But you can say, from now until tomorrow morning, I won't kill an animal. And so therefore you make that promise and you can keep it for at least that duration of time. Obviously, the ideal situation is to never again engage in non-virtue. But we have to be realistic that depending on what we're talking about and depending on the quality of our practice and the situation we find ourselves in, we can't always do that. So generally, he's just saying the way he phrases it is, for all those negative actions that I can refrain from forever, may I never again commit them. And for those I can't refrain from forever, may I not engage in them for as long as possible, whether that be 1 year, 1 week, 1 year, 1 month, 1 week, 1 day, even 1 minute, like that. And if you go, I think, to the FPNT store and you look up the Vajrasattva practice that he has, at the end of it, I think it's his dedication. I think his words are there to give you his language. But really, the whole point is just making sure that you promise as much as you can, right? You don't want to be like, oh, I'll just do a day like that. No. The goal is to never again engage in non-virtue, but we don't want to break our promises. So we have to try to find a balance between those two things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Jyoti, would you like to ask your question, or would you like me to read it out from chat?
You read it out, Alice.
Okay, so the question is, Venerable, my question is specific to the 7-point cause and effect practice during the generation of bodhicitta, which was discussed in the last class. When one contemplates how self-cherishing is the cause of manifest suffering, there is an overwhelming emotional response that arises, especially with regards to the woes and suffering of victims of abuse. It's hard to develop equanimity towards the perpetrators, since the middle way is dependent origination, in that all phenomena are empty of inherent existence. Correct this error of equanimity while generating aspirational bodhicitta.
So it's true, never mind bodhicitta, but just compassion alone. Having compassion towards people that cause harm is very difficult, especially when the type of harm they cause is something you have a personal relationship with, right? Whether they're people that are causing harm to you or not, but the type of harm they cause is something you have some sort of personal identification with. It can be very, very hard to generate compassion towards them. And if you can't generate compassion or love towards them, then you won't be able to generate bodhicitta towards them. And if you can't generate bodhicitta towards them, you can't generate bodhicitta, because bodhicitta only exists when it has all sentient beings as its object, right? There's no such thing as partial bodhicitta. And great compassion, there's no such thing as partial great compassion. You can have a compassion that's focused, that's partial, but you can't have partial great compassion, because great compassion encompasses all sentient beings. But that is why we do a meditation on, when we do a meditation on compassion, we bring in equanimity to try to overcome that obstacle, right? If it was easy, then we wouldn't have to practice equanimity, because it would be a natural state, right? So the truth is that it is a very big obstacle. And the way to overcome it is just to bring it into your practice. When you do a practice on meditation, you start with, when you do a meditation on compassion, you start with visualizing a sentient being who it's very easy for you to generate compassion towards. And then you visualize a sentient being who is more difficult. And then you visualize someone who it's hard. And even then, there are different levels of hard, right? There's someone who insulted you at work, and there's someone who beat you on the street, and there is someone who's a dictator that's killed tens of thousands of people. Like, there's different levels of difficulty. At least for me, there are, right? So you start with someone that's a little bit hard. So maybe someone that you're generally friends with, but they're kind of being a jerk to you right now, right? Like that. And when you can do that, then you increase it. And for me, the easiest way to tap into compassion towards people that cause harm is remembering that the reason they cause harm is because they're suffering. It doesn't excuse the harm they do. It never excuses it, right? Recognizing the conditions and the circumstances doesn't excuse harm, but it creates a context that allows me to understand it more fully. So it's never excusing someone who's engaging in harmful actions, but it's recognizing that their harmful actions come from their own experience of suffering, their own desire to be happy, and their inability to understand the distinction between what causes happiness and what causes suffering. If they actually knew what real happiness was or how to achieve happiness, then they wouldn't be causing harm to others. If they themselves didn't suffer, then they would not be causing harm to others. So all of their actions of harm towards others come from their own experiences of suffering, both immediate and in past lives, and their wish to be free from suffering, but their wish being confused and not knowing the true nature of reality. So when I can remind myself of that, when I can see that all of their harm comes from suffering, it makes it easier for me to develop compassion towards them, even if it's just in my meditation practice. Maybe not in real life, and my outside of my meditation practice, it still is difficult. But the way you build up to that is by doing it in meditation. Then it becomes more familiar and easier. So then maybe when you're in a situation when someone insults you or says something mean to you or does some harmful activity, then you might have a moment of frustration and anger and hurt, but then you say, that's coming from their suffering. I really wish they weren't suffering. That's my real goal. If they weren't suffering, then they wouldn't be causing harm to me or to themselves. How unfortunate it is that they're suffering right now. And how much better would it be if they could be free from that suffering and from all the causes of suffering? So eventually, that should be our immediate reaction, but it takes a long time to get there. And so the way we do it is baby steps. And that's what meditation is for. Meditation, our personal private meditation practice, is to develop, like we're going to the gym. We build up those muscles. So then we go to the real world and we have to face actual harm doers and perpetrators of violence. We can do so with open hearts. Okay. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Other questions? No? Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, if there are no other questions for today, then it's a little early, but I don't want to rush a meditation because it'd be very ineffective. So instead, we can do some dedication prayers. Okay. Let us take a moment to recognize, actually, you know what we can do? This would be good to set us up for next week. So we just finished this section through verse 27, right? And what that section is how to apply our conscientiousness to accumulating virtue. The next section is verse 28 through 36. And that is how to apply conscientiousness to abandoning affliction and the inflictive minds. So you see how these two sections work together. The first one is about accumulating virtue, applying conscientiousness to accumulating virtue. And the next one is applying conscientiousness to abandoning the afflictive minds. So as we're saying, everything, you can take two approaches to the same thing, right? One is of what you should be doing, and one is what you should be avoiding. So what would be good, before we do our dedication, let's just read this section together, and then we're priming ourselves. So then next week, when we come together to study it more in depth, we've already kind of prepared the way for it, right? So let's go ahead and read verses 28 through 36 together, because that's the next section. And so that section, how to apply your conscientiousness with regard to abandoning the afflictions, has a number of subsections. And this particular section, these verses, are how to contemplate the drawbacks of the afflictive minds. So that's these next verses that we're going to be exploring next week. So we'll start with 28 and go through 36, so we can recite these together. Although enemies such as hatred and craving have neither any arms nor legs, and are neither courageous nor wise, how have I been used like a slave by them? For while they dwell within my mind, at their pleasure they cause me harm. Yet I patiently endure them without any anger. But this is an inappropriate and shameful time for patience. Should even all the gods and the anti-gods rise up against me as my enemies, they could not lead nor place me in the roaring fires of deepest hell. But the mighty foe, these disturbing conceptions, in a moment can cast me amidst those flames, which, when met, will cause not even the ashes of the king of mountains to remain. All other enemies are incapable of remaining for such a length of time, as can my disturbing conceptions, the long-time enemy with neither beginning nor end. If I agreeably honor and entrust myself to others, they will bring me benefit and happiness. But if I entrust myself to these disturbing conceptions, in future they will bring only misery and harm. While in cyclic existence, how can I be joyful and unafraid if in my heart I readily prepare a place for this incessant enemy of long duration, the sole cause for the increase of all that harms me? And how shall I ever have happiness if in a net of attachment within my mind there dwell the guardians of the prison of cyclic existence, the disturbing conceptions that become my butchers and my tormentors in hell? Therefore, as long as this enemy is not slain with certainty before my very eyes, I shall never give up exerting myself toward that end. Having become angry at someone who caused only slight and short-term harm, self-important people will not sleep until their enemy is overcome. Okay. So those are the verses that we will be studying together next time. So it's good to leave, to end the class, preparing for what's going to come next. So with that, let's take a moment to recognize that we have accumulated some merit by our time together today, by studying the teachings of the Buddha, by trying to apply those teachings to our lives, by trying to cultivate positive minds. We have accumulated good karma, also known as merit. And we want to dedicate that good karma not just to our own happiness, to our own benefit, but we dedicate it to the benefit and happiness of all sentient beings, that all sentient beings may be free from suffering. And we wish that karma could ripen in such a way that it frees all those who are suffering from their suffering. And especially we dedicate that karma that all of our holy gurus can continue to show the aspect of living long and healthy lives, can continue to teach the holy Dharma, and that we ourselves may quickly achieve the state of Buddhahood where we will be of maximum benefit to other sentient beings. And so we dedicate our karma in such a way, whatever merit we've accumulated through our practice together, in such a way that these things may come to pass. And so we'll recite a few dedication prayers. This first one, we will recite once in Tibetan, and then once in English, and then we'll continue with the others in English. Choe Khor Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyorchi Ke Wa Nyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gone Gondu Pe Wa Sho. May the supreme jewel of bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow. May that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. Savior of the snowland teachings and transmigratory beings, who makes extremely clear the path that is the unification of emptiness and compassion, to the lotus holder Tenzin Gyatso I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. May the glorious Guru's lives be long and stable. May all beings equally in the extent of space have happiness. May I and others without exception accumulate merit and purify negativities. And may we be blessed to quickly attain Buddhahood. From my two collections, as vast as space that I have amassed from working with effort at this practice for any great length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds' wisdom eye is blinded by ignorance. Even if I do not reach this state, may I be held in your loving compassion for all my lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of complete graded paths of the teachings. And may I please all the Buddhas by my practice. Using skillful means drawn by the strong force of compassion, may I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings with the points of the path as I have discerned them. May I uphold the Buddhist teachings for a very long time. With my heart going out with great compassion in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread or once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness and aid. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time, by even this greater path to enlightenment, completed due to the wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. May all human and non-human beings who eliminate adversity and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent paths never be parted in any of their lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtuous practices, may he always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere. May the King of Dharma Tsongkhapa's way of Dharma practice flourish, may the omens of obstacles be pacified, and all the conducive circumstances be complete. By relying on the two accumulations of myself and others in the three times, may the teachings of the Concord Losam Drakpa blaze for a long time. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate you spending time with me today. Thank you.